The envelope arrived at the worst possible moment. I was stacking the last boxes in the apartment building hallway, and the landlord was looking at me with a mix of pity and impatience. 3 months of back rent. The eviction notice was official. And there I was, Claire Anderson, 32 years old, unemployed for 8 months, with a resume no one wanted to read anymore and a bank account that laughed at negative numbers. My mom had passed away just 6 months earlier. Cancer. I had spent the last 3 years of her life being her nurse, therapist, cook, and provider. When she was gone, she took with her any sense of purpose I still had. The consulting job was long gone. Who keeps someone who spends 3 years leaving early and calling out sick to take care of a sick relative? Even with all the labor laws in the world, the reality is cold. A company wants productivity, not personal drama. I took the envelope with trembling fingers, expecting another bill, another summons, another door slamming in my face. But no. It was on expensive stationery, the kind you could feel the quality of just by touching it. Drummond and Associates, Corporate Law. My name was typed in an elegant font, and the address was correct. For a second, I thought it was a mistake. The letter was formal, but the contents chilled me to the bone. We request your presence at our office to discuss a commercial proposal of interest. Subject: temporary spousal representation. Compensation to be discussed in person. There was a phone number, an address in the most expensive part of the city, and a signature I couldn't decipher. I called 3 times before I had the courage to speak. The secretary had the voice of someone used to filtering important people from ordinary ones. I scheduled an appointment for the next day at 2 in the afternoon. I spent the entire night imagining what in the world temporary spousal representation meant. My mind created scenarios ranging from an arranged marriage to a porn film. Desperation does that to you. It makes you consider possibilities you would never think of under normal circumstances. The next morning, I put on my only suit that was still presentable, an inheritance from the days when I had a promising career, and looked at myself in the cracked bathroom mirror. Claire Anderson. The strong woman who had taken care of a sick mother until the end. The woman who had been fired for missing a day for the funeral. The woman who was 3 days away from being homeless. But still a woman. Still standing. Still fighting. The office was on the 22nd floor of a building that looked more like a monument to money. Marble floors, paintings that seemed to be worth more than my entire life, receptionists who sized me up in 2 seconds. I waited for 40 minutes. When they finally called my name, my anxiety had turned into a toxic mixture of curiosity and desperation. Mr. Richard Drummond was everything I expected of an expensive lawyer. Impeccable suit, a watch that cost more than a car, a well-practiced smile. He offered me coffee in a porcelain cup and got straight to the point, as if he were reading a medical prescription. Our client needs a wife for 6 months. A service contract. Public appearances, social events, representation at family gatherings. Nothing physical, of course. Strictly representation.
Just to make sure you keep getting our stories, subscribe to the channel, give this one a like too, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from.
The payment is $500,000, deposited at the end of the period, upon full compliance with the contractual clauses. $500,000. The number echoed in my head like a cannon shot. $500,000. I could pay off everything, start over, maybe even open the small business I had always dreamed of. But the conversation had a strange smell, like food you're not sure is still good. Who is your client? I asked, trying not to sound too desperate. Ethan Sterling. Businessman, heir to Sterling Holdings. He needs to keep up appearances for family reasons. His grandmother, Mrs. Yolanda Sterling, is 93 and controls 51% of the company's shares. She wants to see her grandson married and happy before it's too late. Ethan Sterling. Even I, who had been disconnected from the business world for months, knew that name. Billionaire playboy, always in the society pages with different models, known for being arrogant and a womanizer. And now he needed a fake wife to fool his dying grandmother. The situation was so absurd I almost laughed. Why me? The question came out before I could think better of it. There are actresses, models, women who are paid to do exactly this. Mr. Drummond studied me for a few seconds, as if deciding how much of the truth he could tell me. Our client wants someone authentic, far from his circle. Mrs. Sterling has a very sharp radar for fakeness. She's already rejected 3 previous candidates. Women who were too obvious, too manufactured. Manufactured. The word bothered me, but I understood the reasoning. A normal woman, with a real history, real problems, would be more convincing to a 93-year-old woman who had probably seen everything in life. I was authentic out of necessity, not by choice. I need time to think, I said, but I already knew what my answer would be. When you're drowning, you don't question the quality of the rope they throw you. Understandable. But our client would like an answer by tomorrow. Mrs. Sterling's situation is delicate. Time is a significant factor. He handed me a sealed folder. Here are all the terms of the contract. I recommend you read them carefully. If you accept, we will meet the day after tomorrow for the signature and an immediate start. I left the office with the folder under my arm and my head spinning. Out on the street, the contrast was brutal. People rushing back and forth, normal life, while I held in my hands the possibility of a radical change. $500,000 for 6 months of pretending. Was it immoral? Probably. Was it my only way out? Definitely. That night, I opened the folder and read every paragraph 3 times. The contract was extremely detailed. Residence in the Sterling Mansion. Wardrobe provided. A schedule of social engagements. Etiquette and posture lessons. A total ban on parallel relationships. Absolute discretion about the terms of the agreement. And a clause that caught my attention: the contractee agrees to portray the role of a passionate and devoted wife in all public and family situations, maintaining emotional and behavioral consistency. To portray the role of a passionate wife, for a man I didn't even know, who would probably despise me, who was buying me as if I were a decorative object for his fake life. But $500,000 was $500,000. And Ethan Sterling, as despicable as he was offering an honest way out of my problems. More honest than many other alternatives that had crossed my mind in recent weeks. I signed the next day, my hand trembling and my heart pounding. Mr. Drummond congratulated me as if I had just graduated from Harvard. Our driver will take you to the estate this afternoon. Mr. Sterling expects you at 3 o'clock for an initial conversation. Good luck, Claire. I'm sure it will be an interesting experience. The car that picked me up was the kind I only saw in movies. Leather interior, uniformed driver, cold water in the cup holder. During the 40-minute drive to the mansion, I tried to mentally prepare myself to meet my temporary husband. I created expectations, devised strategies, planned how to position myself. None of it mattered. The Sterling Mansion wasn't just big, it was an architectural statement. Wrought iron gates, gardens that looked like they were out of a magazine, a fountain in the center of the entrance that cascaded water like a waterfall. Everything there screamed money, power, tradition. And I, with my baggage of 3 borrowed suitcases, was about to pretend I belonged in that world. The front door opened before I even touched the bell. An elegant woman in her 50s greeted me with a professional smile. You must be Claire. I'm Helen, the house manager. Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in the library. Please, follow me. We walked through ornate corridors, passed through rooms that looked like museums, and went up a marble staircase that echoed our steps. The library was on the 2nd floor and had more books than I had ever seen in my entire life. That's where he was. Ethan Sterling. My fake husband. My employer. My ticket out of poverty. He turned when I entered, and for a second, I was speechless. The photos in the newspapers didn't do him justice. Tall, broad shoulders, dark eyes that seemed to x-ray me. Handsome in an unsettling way, as if nature had gone to great lengths to create someone perfect and then given him a horrible personality to compensate. He wore a simple white shirt and dress pants, but the way he wore the clothes turned any fabric into a statement of superiority. Claire Anderson. It wasn't a greeting, it was a confirmation. As if he were checking an item on a shopping list. I hope you've read the contract carefully. I've read it 3 times, I replied, trying not to show how intimidated his presence made me feel. And I accept the terms. Good. He came closer, and I realized he was even taller than he looked from a distance. A few things need to be clear from the start. This is a business arrangement, not a relationship. You are here to fulfill a specific role for a set period. I don't expect us to develop any kind of emotional closeness. Maintain a convincing performance in public and be yourself when we're alone. It will be easier for both of us that way. The coldness in his voice annoyed me more than it should have. Who did he think he was? He was already treating me like an employee before I had even unpacked my bags. I understand perfectly, Mr. Sterling. You may have enough money to hire me, but you don't have enough to buy who I am. I will portray your passionate wife in public, but don't expect submission in private. He seemed surprised by my response. Maybe he expected a desperate woman, willing to accept any treatment in exchange for the payment. He wasn't entirely wrong, but I still had my dignity, even if it was being negotiated for $500,000. Interesting, he muttered, more to himself than to me. Helen will show you to your quarters and explain the house routine. Tomorrow we start the preparations for your first public appearance. We'll have 3 days to get you suitable. Suitable. Another word that deeply bothered me, but I swallowed the irritation. I needed that money more than I needed to preserve my ego. At least for now. My room in the mansion was bigger than my old apartment. King-size bed, a closet the size of a store, a bathroom with a marble tub and a shower that looked like a spaceship cabin. On the dresser, there was a card, "Welcome to the Sterling family. I hope you feel at home. Yolanda." Mrs. Yolanda. The grandmother. The reason for the whole charade. For a moment, I felt guilty. A 93-year-old woman, probably with only a few months to live, being deceived by her own grandson. But the guilt didn't last long. If Ethan Sterling was willing to lie to his grandmother for money, I was willing to help out of necessity. At least my motivation was honest. That first night, I ate dinner alone in a dining room that could fit my entire extended family. Helen explained that Mr. Sterling had business commitments and that from then on, we would only coordinate our schedules when necessary. Life in the house will continue as normal, she said, you will just be an addition to the routine. An addition to the routine. Like a new piece of furniture or a garden renovation. That was my position in that house, a decorative element with an expiration date. But decorative elements don't pay $500,000. There was something more behind the whole story, and I was going to find out what it was. I lay in the gigantic bed looking at the hand-painted ceiling and thought about the journey that had brought me there. 6 months ago, I was a normal woman with a normal life and normal problems. Now I was in a mansion, fake married to an arrogant billionaire, about to deceive an old woman and pretend a life that could never be truly mine. The phone rang. It was Helen, letting me know that at 9 in the morning, the suitability lessons would begin. A personal stylist, an etiquette coach, a posture expert. In 3 days, they would transform me into an acceptable version of Ethan Sterling's wife. The question that wouldn't leave my mind was, how much of me would be left after this transformation? I closed my eyes and, for the first time in months, I wasn't worrying about bills to pay or places to live. The relief of financial security was so intense I almost cried. $500,000. 6 months of pretending. A high price for my dignity, but maybe the only price I could pay for my survival. The alarm clock rang at 7 in the morning. I didn't need it. I had been awake for 2 hours, looking out the bedroom window at the perfectly manicured gardens and thinking about how drastically my life had changed in less than 24 hours. From a woman being evicted to a fake billionaire's wife. If someone told me this story, I would laugh and say it only happens in bad movies. Helen knocked on the door at 8:30 with a breakfast tray that looked like a commercial set. Fresh croissants, fruit cut into geometric shapes, freshly squeezed orange juice. Mr. Sterling has already left for his morning appointments, she informed me, but he left a message that the preparation team will arrive in an hour. Preparation team. As if I were a renovation project that needed specialized professionals to become habitable. I ate slowly, savoring every bite not because it was delicious, which it was, but because I knew it was probably the last morning I would be just Claire Anderson. Starting that day, my metamorphosis into Claire Sterling would begin. They arrived like a fashion army. 3 impeccably dressed women, carrying briefcases, mobile racks, and an absurd amount of beauty products. The group leader introduced herself as Patricia Vance, a style consultant specializing in high-impact transformations. The other 2 were a personal stylist and a social etiquette coach, respectively. All of them looked at me like scientists observing a new specimen. Well, Patricia said, circling me like a predator studying its prey, we have a lot of work ahead of us. 3 days to transform this into a convincing wife for Ethan Sterling. It won't be easy, but it's not impossible. This. She referred to me as this. The urge to tell them all to go to hell was immediate and intense, but I took a deep breath and remembered the $500,000. Enough money to swallow more humiliation than that. The next 8 hours were torture disguised as a beauty treatment. I tried on clothes, learned to walk in high heels without looking like a drunken flamingo, and memorized etiquette rules that seemed to have been invented by aliens obsessed with protocol. A businessman's wife doesn't gesticulate much, don't cross your legs that way, smile but don't laugh out loud, agree but don't give too many opinions. The etiquette coach, Mrs. Miriam, was a 60-year-old woman who spoke as if she were reciting the Constitution. A lady knows when to speak and, more importantly, when to be silent. The husband is the protagonist, the wife is the elegant complement. Every time she said that, I bit my tongue harder. At the end of the day, I looked in the mirror and didn't completely recognize the woman who was there. My hair had been cut and styled in a sophisticated way, the makeup highlighted features I didn't even know I had, and the clothes fit my body in a way that made me feel different, more confident, maybe. Or maybe just in costume. Ethan came home at 9 that night. I was in the living room, reading a book from the library, History of Contemporary Art, because Patricia said that a businessman's wife needed to demonstrate culture. He stopped at the door when he saw me and was silent for a few seconds. Impressive, he finally said, but the tone was more of a technical assessment than a compliment. They did a good job. You almost look appropriate. Appropriate. Not beautiful, not elegant. Appropriate. Like a piece of decor that had finally found its place in the room. Thanks for the overwhelming praise, I replied, closing the book. It's exactly the reaction every woman dreams of hearing. He seemed to notice the sarcasm and almost smiled. Almost. Tomorrow will be the real test. A charity event at the country club. Lots of important people, some journalists, photographers. Mrs. Yolanda will be there. It will be your official debut as my wife." The mention of his grandmother made me nervous. It was one thing to pretend for strangers, but it was another to look a 93-year-old woman in the eyes and deliberately lie about my feelings for her grandson. "What if she doesn't believe it?" "She will believe it," he replied with a confidence I wasn't sure I felt or if it was just my impression. "Mrs. Yolanda wants to believe it. For years she's been pushing for marriage, children, stability. Seeing me happy is her last wish in life." Happy? The word sounded strange coming from his mouth. During the few hours we had spent together, Ethan Sterling did not seem like a person who was particularly familiar with the concept of happiness. Successful, powerful, rich, but happy? I highly doubted it. "We have to create a story," he continued, pouring himself a scotch from the cabinet. "How we met, how long we've been together, why we decided to get married. Mrs. Yolanda will ask for details. She has a habit of testing people." We spent the next 2 hours creating a fake biography for our non-existent relationship. According to our official version, we met at an art exhibition a year ago. He was enchanted by my cultural sensitivity and refined intelligence. I fell in love with his determination and generosity. A discreet courtship for 8 months, an intimate engagement, a simple wedding in a private ceremony because we prefer privacy to ostentation. It was a beautiful, well-constructed story, with enough details to be convincing but not so elaborate that we would get lost in our own lies. The problem was that as we talked about this fictional couple, I started to feel a pang of jealousy for the invented Claire. She had found love, she had security, she had a husband who admired her. The real Claire only had a temporary contract and a man who treated her like furniture. "One more thing," Ethan said when we finished refining the details. "Public displays of affection are necessary. Nothing exaggerated, but some things are expected. Holding hands, an arm offered, an occasional kiss. Can you do that?" The question irritated me. As if I were a teenage virgin who had never touched a man. "I can portray a passionate woman, yes. The question is, can you portray a passionate man? Because so far you've only shown the same passion you would have for a new chair." This time he really smiled, and the effect was devastating. Ethan Sterling smiling was a completely different man. Younger, more human, more dangerous. "Touché," he said. "I will try my best to be a more convincing passionate husband." We went up to our rooms almost at midnight. In the hallway, he stopped in front of my door. "Claire." The way he said my name sounded different, less formal. "I know this is strange for you. For me, too. But it needs to work. It's not just about money or inheritance. Mrs. Yolanda is dying, and the only thing she wants before she leaves is to see me happy. Even if that happiness is manufactured." For a moment, I saw something that resembled vulnerability in his eyes. As if the cold businessman's mask had slipped for a few seconds, revealing a grandson who genuinely loved his grandmother and was willing to do anything to give her peace in her final months. It almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. "I will fulfill my part of the agreement," I replied. "Tomorrow you will have the most passionate wife $500,000 can buy." He nodded and went to his own room. I closed the door and leaned against it, with my eyes closed. The first day was over, and I was still standing. 2 more days to prepare, then 6 months of pretending. 270 days of faking being in love with a man who saw me as a decorative object. I took off my heels and felt my feet screaming in relief. In the closet mirror, the woman who was staring back at me looked sophisticated, elegant, confident. She looked like she belonged in that world of luxury and power. The question that haunted me was, when it was all over, would I still be able to recognize the Claire that existed before all this began? The event at the country club would be my baptism by fire. There was no room for error. A bad performance and Ethan could terminate the contract before the first month was even over. A performance that was too good and I ran the risk of losing myself in my own character. I lay in bed thinking about the irony of the situation. I, who had spent 3 years taking care of a sick mother and being invisible to the world, would now be the center of attention in one of the most powerful houses in the country. Temporarily, of course. But still, for 6 months, I would be Claire Sterling, the woman who had managed to win the heart of the city's most eligible bachelor. If only it were true. The dress Patricia chose for my debut cost more than my entire salary for a year when I had a salary. Navy blue, impeccable cut, fabric that looked like liquid flowing over my body. It was paired with shoes that were small architectural works of art and borrowed jewelry that probably had its own insurance policy. When I finished getting ready, I couldn't even believe the woman who was staring back at me in the mirror. "Perfect," Patricia declared, adjusting a final detail on the necklace. "Elegant enough to impress, but not so much as to outshine the husband. Exactly what a wife should be. Exactly what a wife should be." The phrase echoed in my head as I went down the mansion stairs. Ethan was waiting for me in the entrance hall, impeccable in a tuxedo that probably cost more than a small car. When he saw me, he stopped looking at his watch and observed me from head to toe. You look stunning, he said, and this time the compliment sounded genuine. Thank you. You don't look bad yourself. It was a lie. He was devastatingly handsome, but I wasn't going to feed the ego of someone who treated me like an employee. The car was waiting for us at the entrance. During the drive to the club, Ethan briefed me on the people we would be meeting. Robert Cavendish, who owns the hotel chain, is married to Sonia, who loves gossip. Avoid giving her too much personal information. Mark Jones, from the bank, is a family friend for decades, but he has a loose tongue. If he asks about business, change the subject. The list went on for 20 minutes. Names, faces, characteristics, traps to avoid. It was like studying for a test where failing meant public humiliation and losing $500,000. No pressure. And Mrs. Yolanda? I asked when he finished the list. She'll arrive an hour after us. It's her strategy, to make a grand entrance when everyone is already present. She likes to be the center of attention, even at 93. Ethan smiled when he talked about his grandmother, and again I could see the genuine affection he felt for her. It was the only time he seemed truly human, when he talked about Mrs. Yolanda. It made me wonder if there were other people in his life capable of arousing that hidden humanity. The country club was exactly what I imagined when I thought of a rich people's place. Classic architecture, impeccable gardens, staff who seemed to have been trained by British royalty. We got out of the car in front of the main entrance, where a small group of photographers was already positioned. Smile, Ethan murmured, offering his arm. And remember, you are madly in love with me. I put my hand on his arm and smiled as if I were the happiest woman in the world. The flashes went off immediately. Ethan. Claire. Look over here. The photographers knew us by name, which was unsettling. It meant that our fake story was already being publicized in the press. We walked towards the entrance, and I tried to move as Patricia had taught me, firm but not long strides, straight back, a natural smile. The problem was that there was nothing natural about the situation. I was playing a role for cameras, faking feelings for money, lying to the whole world about who I was. Inside the main ballroom, the city's elite greeted each other with air kisses and calculated smiles. Women with jewelry that cost fortunes, men with watches that were worth apartments. Conversations about trips to places I only knew from television, businesses that moved more money than I could imagine. Ethan, darling. A woman in her late 50s approached with open arms. Sonia Cavendish, the one who liked to gossip. And this must be the famous Claire who stole our eternal bachelor's heart. Sonia, a pleasure. Ethan greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. Claire, this is Sonia Cavendish, a great family friend. Nice to meet you, I said, extending my hand, but she pulled me into a tight hug. Don't be silly, dear. We're practically family now. Tell me everything. How did you two meet? Was it love at first sight? Ethan was always so selective with his girlfriends. The questions came like a machine gun, and I answered following exactly the script we had rehearsed. We met at an art exhibition. Ethan has a very sensitive eye for beautiful things. I looked at him with what I hoped looked like genuine adoration. I fell in love with the way he saw the world. How romantic. Sonia clapped her hands as if she had just watched a heartwarming movie. And the wedding? I heard it was very private. We prefer intimacy, Ethan replied, putting his arm around my waist. The gesture took me by surprise, but I forced my body to relax. Claire doesn't like ostentation. It's one of the qualities I admire most about her. The lie came so naturally from his mouth that I almost believed it. Almost. Sonia continued to ask questions, but fortunately other people approached, and the conversation dispersed. Over the next hour, we were introduced to at least 30 people. Businessmen, politicians, socialites, all curious about the woman who had tamed Ethan Sterling. I smiled, greeted, answered questions, and played the role of a passionate wife with a poise that surprised me. Maybe years of taking care of my sick mother had taught me to pretend so as not to worry others. Maybe desperation really worked miracles. Or maybe I was a better actress than I imagined. You're doing well, Ethan murmured during a moment when we were alone at the bar. Very well, in fact. Don't sound so surprised. Poor women also know how to talk to important people. The irony escaped before I could control myself. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Before he could answer, a murmur went through the room. The conversations died down, heads turned, and I knew immediately that Mrs. Yolanda had arrived. It was impossible not to know. Her presence transformed the atmosphere of the place instantly. She entered leaning on a silver-handled cane, but her posture was as straight as a queen's. White hair styled in an impeccable bun, a simple but obviously expensive black dress, discreet jewelry that screamed tradition and power. At 93, Yolanda Sterling still commanded any room she entered. Grandma. Ethan went to her immediately, and I followed him. When we got close, he bent down to kiss her cheek. You look radiant tonight. Don't give me flattery, boy, she replied, but the smile on her face showed genuine affection. Then she looked at me. And this must be Claire. The scrutiny I received lasted about 15 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Bright blue eyes examined me from head to toe, as if she were reading my entire history through my skin. Finally, she extended her hand. "Mrs. Sterling," I said, shaking her hand firmly. "It's an honor to meet you." "The honor is mine, dear. I finally meet the woman who achieved the impossible, making my grandson fall in love for real." The phrase hit me like a slap in the face. Making my grandson fall in love for real. If she only knew that what she had achieved was the exact opposite, being bought to fake a love that didn't exist. The guilt rose in my throat like bile, but I managed to keep smiling. "Ethan is a very special man," I replied, hoping my voice wouldn't tremble. "Any woman would be lucky to have him." Mrs. Yolanda continued to study me. "We'll talk later, you and I alone. I want to get to know the woman who stole my grandson's heart better." The rest of the night passed in a blur of conversations and introductions. We had dinner at a table reserved for the Sterling family and some close friends. I was sitting between Ethan and a businessman who wouldn't stop talking about tech investments. Ethan played the role of the attentive husband. He poured my wine, asked if I was comfortable, and included me in the business conversations in a way that seemed natural. "Claire has a very interesting view on digital marketing," he said during a discussion about business strategies. "She always surprises me with insights that wouldn't have occurred to me." It was a lie, obviously. We had never talked about marketing, but the way he said it made it seem true. For a moment, I almost believed he genuinely admired me professionally. Almost. During dessert, an orchestra began to play and some people headed to the dance floor. Ethan stood up and extended his hand to me. "Dance with me?" It wasn't a request, it was part of the performance. We went to the dance floor and he pulled me into his arms. Dancing with Ethan Sterling was like floating on a cloud. He led with absolute confidence, and I let myself be carried away by the music and the farce. For a few minutes, I closed my eyes and pretended we were a truly passionate couple dancing at our first public appearance as husband and wife. "You dance well," he murmured close to my ear, and the intimate tone made my heart race treacherously. I took dance lessons as a teenager. My mom always said every woman should know how to dance. The mention of my mom came out without me thinking. For a second, I forgot I was acting. "She must be proud of you. She died 6 months ago." The information escaped before I could control myself. It wasn't in the script. It wasn't part of the performance. Ethan missed a step for a fraction of a second. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "How could you? You don't know anything about me beyond what's in the contract." The music ended, but we stood in the middle of the dance floor for a few seconds, looking at each other. There was something different in his eyes, as if he were truly seeing me for the first time. Then the moment passed, and we returned to the table. The event ended around midnight. We said goodbye to everyone with smiles and promises of future meetings. Mrs. Yolanda gave me a tight hug before she left. "You're coming for tea with me tomorrow," she said. It wasn't an invitation, it was an order. At 3 in the afternoon. Alone. In the car, on the way back home, Ethan was unusually silent. He only spoke when we were already arriving at the mansion. "You did very well tonight. Better than I expected. Again, thanks for the overwhelming vote of confidence." I was tired, physically and emotionally. Acting for 4 hours straight was more exhausting than I imagined. "Claire." He stopped the car in the garage entrance, but didn't get out immediately. "About your mom, if you ever want to talk about it." "I won't." I cut him off more harshly than I intended. "My personal life is not part of the contract." He nodded, but I could see that the answer bothered him. Good. He wanted to keep everything professional, so that's what he would get. We weren't going to be friends. We weren't going to confide in each other.
Since you've been here with me all this time, it means you enjoy our story. So, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones. Give this one a like, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from.
I would fulfill my part of the agreement, get my payment, and leave his life forever. We went up to our rooms in silence. At my door, he stopped again. "Tea with Mrs. Yolanda tomorrow. She can ask difficult questions. She has a special talent for detecting lies." "I'll manage." I opened the door to my room. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, wife." I closed the door and leaned against it, my eyes closed. The first test was over, but I felt that the most difficult was yet to come. Mrs. Yolanda was not like the other guests at the party. She wouldn't settle for superficial answers and polite smiles. She wanted to get to know the woman who had won her grandson's heart. The problem was that this woman didn't exist. And tomorrow, during a solo tea with a 93-year-old woman who had nothing to lose, I would have to invent her. The afternoon tea with Mrs. Yolanda took place in the mansion's conservatory, a setting that looked more like a period film. Exotic plants, white wicker furniture, a table set with fine china and pastries that looked like works of art. She was already waiting when I arrived, promptly at 3 o'clock, dressed in a skirt suit that Patricia had specially chosen for the occasion. "Sit down, dear," she said, indicating the chair opposite her. "I hope you like Earl Grey tea. It's been my favorite for over 70 years. I love it." It was a lie, I had never had Earl Grey in my life, but it seemed like the right answer for the moment. Mrs. Yolanda poured the tea with precise movements, even with her 93-year-old hands. "So, Claire, tell me about yourself. Where do you come from? What did you do before you met my grandson? What are your dreams?" The question was simple, but full of traps. How much of the truth could I tell without destroying the charade? I come from a middle-class background. I worked at a consulting firm before I focused on getting married. It wasn't technically a lie. I really had worked at a consulting firm. "And your family?" "My parents separated when I was a teenager. My mom died recently. I don't have any siblings." The truth came out more easily than I expected. Maybe because the pain was still too recent for me to lie about it. Mrs. Yolanda stopped stirring the sugar in her tea and looked at me with renewed attention. "I'm sorry for the loss of your mother. Losing someone we love is always devastating." "Thank you." My voice came out weaker than I would have liked. "Were you close?" "Very. I took care of her during the last years of her life. She was sick." "And you sacrificed your career for that?" The question caught me off guard. How had she deduced that from the little I had said? "Partially, yes." Mrs. Yolanda nodded, as if my answer confirmed something she already suspected. "Ethan told me you met at an art exhibition. Do you like art?" "I do." At least that much was true. I've always been interested in painting, especially Impressionism. "How interesting." Ethan was also always passionate about art. Since he was a child, he spent hours in the studio I set up for him in the attic of the old house. She smiled fondly at the memory. "Of course, his father thought it was a waste of time. 'Men don't paint,' he would say." "Nonsense, of course." It was the first piece of personal information I had received about Ethan, and it made me curious. Did he paint? What was this artistic version of him that his grandmother held in her memory? "Does he still paint?" I asked, momentarily forgetting that I was supposed to know the answer. Mrs. Yolanda looked at me with a strange expression. "You don't know?" Damn. I had fallen into a trap. He doesn't like to talk much about his old hobbies," I quickly improvised. "He says he prefers to focus on the present." She took a sip of her tea, studying me over the cup. "What a shame. Ethan was always talented. He stopped painting when he took over the company 5 years ago. He said he no longer had time for frivolities." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. I had the impression that Mrs. Yolanda was deliberately testing me, throwing out information to see how I would react. The question was I passing the test or failing? "Claire," she said finally, "may I ask you a direct question?" My stomach clenched. "Of course. Do you love my grandson?" The question echoed in the conservatory like a cannon shot. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. How to answer that? Lie directly to a 93-year-old woman who just wanted to see her grandson happy? Or tell the truth and destroy her last dream? I began, but my voice failed. "It's a simple question, dear. Do you love Ethan or not?" I took a deep breath and looked directly into her eyes. "Mrs. Sterling, I care about Ethan very much. He's a complex man. Sometimes difficult to understand, but that doesn't answer my question." She was right. And the intensity of her gaze made me feel like I was in a confession booth, where lying would be an unforgivable sin. "I'm learning to love him," I finally said. "Some people fall in love at first sight. Others build love over time. I'm the second type." It wasn't exactly a lie. It was more like a half-truth. A possibility. A door left ajar. Mrs. Yolanda watched me for a few more seconds, then smiled for the first time since we started talking. "You know, Claire, that was the first honest answer you've given me today." My blood ran cold. Had she known I was lying since the beginning? "I don't understand. Dear, I'm 93 years old. I've seen a lot in this life. I've witnessed real marriages and marriages of convenience. I've met passionate women and women who are only in it for the money. And I can say, with absolute certainty, that you don't fit into any of the obvious categories." She got up from the chair with difficulty, leaning on her cane. "You're not a gold digger. If you were, you would have studied the life of the man you supposedly married better. You're also not a woman madly in love. Your reactions are too calculated, your answers too rehearsed." She walked to the window, her back to me. "But you're also not a bad person. I can see that in the way you talked about your mother, in the sincerity of your grief. You have character, Claire. And that's more than I can say for most people who frequent this social circle." I remained silent, not knowing what to say. I had been exposed, but not in the way I expected. "The question," she continued, turning to face me again, "is what you intend to do with this situation." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." She came back to the table and sat down again. "What my grandson did or didn't do is his problem. What interests me is you." "Me?" You have something that Ethan lost a long time ago. Authenticity. For the few minutes you talked about your mother, you were completely real. And when I asked if you loved my grandson, I saw you fighting between the easy lie and a more complicated truth. She took a sip of her tea and looked at me with an almost maternal smile. You know what my conclusion was? That maybe Ethan did the right thing for the wrong reasons. Maybe he found exactly what he needed without even knowing he was looking for it. You're not going to tell him you know? Tell him what? That my grandson hired a woman of integrity and intelligence to solve his family problems? That she's trying to do her job without losing her dignity? I see nothing wrong with that. The relief was so intense I almost cried. But Mrs. Yolanda wasn't done yet. However, she said, in the tone of someone about to give an order, I want you to do one thing for me. What is it? Don't let this situation turn you into someone you're not. Ethan has a tendency to treat people like objects when he's under pressure. Don't let him do that to you. She got up again, indicating that the conversation had come to an end. And one more thing, Claire. That answer about learning to love my grandson. I suggest you reflect on it. Sometimes, the most important truths start as lies we tell ourselves. I left the conservatory with my head spinning. Mrs. Yolanda knew the marriage was fake, but she wasn't going to expose it. More than that, she seemed to approve of my presence in Ethan's life. As if I were exactly what he needed, even if neither of us knew it yet. The question that haunted me was her last sentence. Was I really learning to love Ethan? Was it possible to develop real feelings for someone who treated me like an employee? Or was I just confusing obvious physical attraction with something deeper? That night, during dinner, Ethan asked how tea with his grandmother had been. She asked a lot of questions, I replied diplomatically. But I think I passed. Mrs. Yolanda liked you, he said, and there was something that resembled pride in his voice. She told me you're a woman of substance. Coming from her, that's a huge compliment. And what do you think? The question came out before I could control myself. Do you consider me a woman of substance or just a temporary employee? Ethan stopped cutting his steak and looked at me directly. Why do you ask? Curiosity. He was silent for a few seconds, as if he were choosing his words carefully. I think you've surprised me constantly since you got here. And that's uncommon. It wasn't exactly a declaration of love, but coming from Ethan Sterling, it was probably the closest thing to a personal compliment I would get. For now. That night, lying in the gigantic bed, I thought about Mrs. Yolanda's words. Was I really learning to love Ethan? Or was I just adapting to the situation, creating emotional ties out of a need for survival? The answer came 3 days later, when Ethan came home visibly dejected after a difficult day of meetings. I was reading in the library when I saw him pass through the hallway, shoulders slumped, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked like exhaustion. Without thinking, I got up and followed him. I knocked on the door of his office, where he had taken refuge. Ethan? Are you okay? I'm fine, he replied, but his voice was anything but fine. I opened the door without being invited. He was sitting behind the mahogany desk, his head in his hands. Problems at the company? Nothing you need to know about. The tone was that of someone who wanted to be left alone, but I didn't move. Hey, I said, approaching the desk. I know this is a business arrangement for you, but we're partners in this charade. If you're down, it affects our performance. He lifted his head and looked at me with an expression that mixed irritation and something that looked like vulnerability. Partners? That's what we are, aren't we? Partners in a well-told lie. Ethan laughed, but it was a joyless laugh. Partners in a well-told lie. I like that definition. It was at that moment that I realized I cared about him. Not because of the money, not because of the contract. I genuinely wanted to comfort him, to help him, to be the person he could trust when the weight of responsibility became too heavy. Maybe Mrs. Yolanda was right. Maybe I really was learning to love him. And maybe that was the most dangerous thing that could happen in the whole situation. The following week brought a proposal that would change everything. Ethan came home on a Thursday with an expression I was already learning to interpret. He had something important to discuss. During dinner, he was quieter than usual, answering questions in monosyllables, clearly setting the stage for a serious conversation. Claire, he finally said, when Helen removed the dessert plates. I need you to come with me to the company tomorrow. We have an important meeting with Japanese investors, and they value family stability very much. They want to meet my wife. It was the first time he had asked me to go beyond social events. The company was his territory, the place where Ethan Sterling was the absolute king. Taking me there meant an expansion of our agreement, a new layer to our charade. Of course, I replied, trying to sound casual. What kind of meeting? A presentation of a new project. They are going to invest $50 million in a joint venture for expansion into the Asian market. They are conservative, traditional. For them, a married man is more reliable than a single one. Once again, I would be an accessory to facilitate business. A well-dressed doll to impress men who made decisions based on prejudices about personal life. But $50 million was $50 million, and I was being paid to do exactly that. I'll get a suitable outfit, I said. Something that screams, conservative and dedicated wife. Ethan smiled, a small but genuine smile. You're getting the hang of this. I'm learning from the best teacher. You're a master of pretending. The phrase came out with more irony than I intended, and his smile faded. Was that a compliment or a criticism? It was an observation, I replied, getting up from the table. Good night, Ethan. See you tomorrow. I left him alone in the dining room and went up to the bedroom, but the conversation continued to echo in my head. You're a master of pretending. It was true, Ethan pretended all the time. The successful businessman, the dedicated grandson, the passionate husband. The question was there a real Ethan underneath all those masks? The next morning, I got ready with extra care. Dark gray suit, hair in an elegant bun, discreet but impeccable makeup. Patricia had chosen the look, conservative but modern, traditional but not old-fashioned. When I looked in the mirror, I saw exactly what they wanted me to be, the perfect wife of the successful businessman. The headquarters of Sterling Holdings was in one of the city's most modern buildings. 40 floors of glass and steel, an architectural statement of power and ambition. The company name shone in golden letters at the top of the building, visible from several parts of the city. It was impossible to look at that and not feel the weight of the responsibility Ethan carried. Impressive, I said, when we got out of the car in the underground garage. It's just a building, he replied, but I could see the discreet pride in his eyes. That building represented generations of work by the Sterling family, and Ethan was the current guardian of that entire empire. We went straight up to the 40th floor, where the executive offices were. The elevator was private, just for Ethan and top-level executives. During the ascent, he gave me the final instructions. The Japanese are formal. Bow slightly when introduced. Don't initiate conversations about business. If they ask about my routine at home, emphasize stability and harmony. Understood. I will be the exemplary wife they expect. The elevator doors opened, revealing an environment that looked more like a movie set. Marble, fine wood, works of art that probably cost fortunes. Impeccably dressed employees walked with hurried steps, carrying briefcases and tablets. Everyone greeted Ethan with reverential respect, and looked at me with poorly disguised curiosity. Everyone, Ethan said, stopping in the middle of the main hallway, I'd like to introduce my wife, Claire Sterling. It was the first time I had heard my name with his last name, and the impact was unexpected. Claire Sterling. For a second, it sounded real. It sounded like I actually belonged in that world. The employees greeted me with polite smiles and comments about how it was a pleasure to finally meet me. A middle-aged woman approached with a warmer smile than the others. Claire, what a joy. I'm Marina, Ethan's executive assistant for 10 years. He talks about you so much. Talks about me so much? Ethan barely talked to me when we were alone, let alone to the employees. But Marina seemed genuinely excited to meet me, so I smiled and replied appropriately. Marina is indispensable here, Ethan said. She knows this company better than I do. Nonsense, Marina replied, but she was visibly pleased with the compliment. Claire, if you need anything while you're here, just let me know. I know every corner of this building. We were led to the main conference room, an intimidating environment with a table for 20 people, a giant projection screen, and a panoramic view of the city. The Japanese investors were already waiting, 3 men in identical dark suits, sitting with impeccable posture and serious expressions. Tanaka-san, Matsui-san, Kimura-san. Ethan bowed slightly as he greeted them, and I did the same. I'd like to introduce my wife, Claire. They immediately stood up and bowed back, pronouncing my name with a heavy but respectful accent. Mrs. Sterling, a pleasure. Over the next hour, I watched Ethan in action in the environment that was truly his territory. He presented numbers, charts, projections, and market strategies. He spoke with absolute authority about economic sectors, global trends, and investment opportunities. It was a version of him I had never seen, confident, charismatic, visionary. The Japanese asked complex technical questions, questioned assumptions, and tested the soundness of the project. Ethan answered everything with precision and confidence, demonstrating an encyclopedic knowledge of his own business. It was impossible not to be impressed. And the family? Tanaka-san suddenly asked, addressing me. Are you happy with your husband's career? It was my cue to shine in the role of the dedicated wife. Very happy, I replied, looking at Ethan with what I hoped looked like genuine admiration. Ethan is an incredibly dedicated man. His passion for business is inspiring. Children? Matsui-san insisted. We are planning, Ethan replied quickly, saving me from inventing an answer. We want to establish a solid foundation first. They nodded in approval. For traditional men like them, responsible family planning was a sign of maturity and reliability. More points for the Sterling couple. The meeting lasted 3 hours. In the end, the Japanese declared themselves very impressed with the proposal and the personal stability of the American partner. $50 million approved, contract to be signed the following week. Ethan had secured one of the largest investments in the company's history, and I had played my part as the exemplary wife to perfection. Excellent work, he said when we were alone in the conference room. You were perfect. Thank you. I was getting ready to leave when something caught my attention. On the table, there was an open folder with number spreadsheets, and in one of them I saw something that made me stop. Ethan, can I ask a question about the project? He seemed surprised. Of course. I saw the distribution numbers here. Are you planning all the logistics through urban centers? Yes. It's the most efficient model. But what about the rural areas? The Asian market has a gigantic rural population. Wouldn't it be smarter to create decentralized distribution points? Ethan looked at me as if I had just spoken Mandarin. You know about logistics? I worked at a corporate strategy consulting firm for 5 years. Before all this. I pointed to the spreadsheets. That distribution structure will work in the big cities, but you'll lose a significant market in the peripheral areas. He approached the table and began to examine the numbers more closely. Go on. For 20 minutes, we analyzed the distribution spreadsheets together. I pointed out flaws in the strategy, suggested alternatives, and showed how small adjustments could increase the project's reach by at least 30%. Ethan asked technical questions, tested my suggestions, and gradually his expression changed from surprise to something that resembled respect. How did you notice that in a quick glance? He finally asked. Because I'm not emotionally invested in the project. Sometimes, an external perspective sees what's been right in front of us for months. He was silent for a few seconds, studying my face as if he were seeing me for the first time. Claire, would you like to participate in the strategic review of the project? What do you mean? As a consultant. Not as my wife, as a professional. Your observations were valuable. It was the first time Ethan had offered me something based on my competence, not on my ability to play a role. Seriously? Completely serious. I can get you a temporary office here, you can review all the documents, suggest improvements. Of course, it would be compensated separately from our other agreement, our marital charade. For a moment, he was offering something real, a chance to use my professional training, to contribute something significant. I would love to. Great. Marina can arrange everything. You would start on Monday. We left the company with a completely different dynamic. In the car, instead of the usual awkward silence, we talked about market strategies, economic trends, and the challenges of international expansion. It was stimulating to have an intellectual conversation with Ethan, to see the growing respect in his eyes as I demonstrated technical knowledge. Why didn't you tell me you had this experience before? He asked when we got home. You didn't ask. Our relationship is strictly professional, remember? You hire a wife, not a consultant. Maybe I hired both without knowing it. That night, we had dinner together for the first time since I had arrived at the mansion. Not because it was necessary to keep up appearances, but because we had things to discuss. Projects, strategies, ideas. It was a strange feeling. For the first time, I was Claire Anderson, not Claire Sterling. For the first time, Ethan was interested in who I really was, not just in how I could pretend. Can I ask a personal question? He said during dessert. You can try. Why did you accept this agreement? $500,000 is a lot of money, but you clearly have enough talent to rebuild your career. Why choose this path? The question caught me off guard. No one had asked about my motivations since it all began. I was desperate, I replied honestly. Unemployed for 8 months, being evicted, no prospects. When you're drowning, you don't question the quality of the rope they throw you. And now? Do you still feel desperate? I thought about the question for a few seconds. No. Now I feel confused. Confused how? This world, this life, this version of me that wears expensive dresses and goes to gala events, sometimes it seems too real. As if I could get used to it and forget who I really am. Ethan watched me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. And who are you really? A woman who took care of her sick mother until the end. Who lost her job because of it and doesn't regret it. Who prefers an honest conversation to 100 polite compliments. Who believes that competence matters more than a last name or a bank account. That woman, he said slowly, is exactly who I see when I look at you. The comment completely disarmed me. It was the most personal and kind thing Ethan had ever said to me since we met. For a moment, I forgot that our relationship was contractual. I forgot he was paying me to be there. For a moment, it was just a man and a woman talking about who they really were underneath the social masks. Ethan, I said, gathering the courage to ask the question that had been tormenting me for days. Are you ever really yourself? Or do you always pretend to be what others expect? He was silent for so long that I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more vulnerable. I don't remember the last time I was just myself. I think I stopped knowing who the real Ethan was when I took over the company. And who was he? The real Ethan? A kid who painted in his grandmother's attic, who dreamed of having an art gallery, who believed he could change the world through beauty. He laughed, but it was a melancholic laugh. Naive, don't you think? I think he sounds like someone worth getting to know. Our eyes met for a few seconds, and something changed in that moment. A barrier had fallen, a mask had slipped. For the first time, I was seeing the man behind the businessman, and he was seeing the woman behind the hired wife. Claire, he said, his voice almost a whisper. This is getting complicated. I know. It shouldn't be happening. I know. But it is happening. I know. He got up from the table and walked to the window, his back to me. Maybe we should maintain our professional distance. To not complicate the agreement. Maybe, I agreed, but the words sounded hollow even to me. We went up to our rooms in silence, but it was a different silence from before. It was loaded with unspoken things, with unexplored possibilities, with a tension that was not only physical but emotional. At the door of my room, he stopped. You start at the company on Monday, he said. As a consultant. Does that change anything between us? I don't know, I replied honestly. Do you? I have no idea. We went into our respective rooms, but I spent the entire night awake, thinking about the conversation. Ethan Sterling had layers I never imagined. Underneath the cold, calculating businessman, there was a man who had given up his own dreams to carry the weight of family expectations. A man who painted in his grandmother's attic and dreamed of changing the world through art. And me? What was I becoming in that world of luxury and lies? Was I still the Claire who had taken care of her sick mother? Or was I transforming into someone different, someone who could genuinely belong in that life? The answer came on Monday, when I arrived at Sterling Holdings not as a decorative wife, but as a professional. Marina showed me my temporary office, smaller than Ethan's, but still bigger than any workspace I had ever had. A glass desk, a state-of-the-art computer, a view of the city. Welcome to the team, she said, with a genuine smile. I spent the next few days immersed in spreadsheets, reports, and market analyses. It was stimulating to use my training again, to feel like I was contributing something real and valuable. The suggestions I made were implemented immediately, and I saw the positive results reflected in the project's numbers. More importantly, I started to gain respect within the company, not as the boss's wife, but as a competent professional. Executives who initially treated me with polite condescension started seeking my opinion on their own areas. In 1 week, I had established myself as a functional part of the team. You're causing a quiet revolution here, Marina said on a Thursday, during lunch. Half the directors are afraid you'll reorganize their departments too. That's not the goal, I replied. I just want to contribute. And you are contributing? Ethan mentioned yesterday that your modifications to the Japanese project increased the profit margin by 22%. Ethan was talking about my work with other executives. It was professional recognition that I hadn't received in a long time, and the effect on my self-esteem was immeasurable. For the first time in months, I felt useful, valued, respected. But the situation at home became more complex. Ethan and I established a strange routine. During the day, we were professional colleagues who discussed strategies and analyzed reports. At night, we went back to being a fake husband and wife, having dinner together and talking about pleasantries. The problem was that the boundaries between these two relationships began to blur. It was difficult to pretend indifference at night when we had spent the day collaborating intensely. It was impossible to maintain emotional distance when we saw each other functioning in our respective professional elements. Claire, he said on a Friday, when we were reviewing the final adjustments of the project. Can I make you a proposal? What kind of proposal? Professional. When the 6-month contract ends, I'd like you to consider staying at the company. As a permanent consultant. Or even as a director of strategy. The offer caught me completely off guard. Are you offering me a real job? I'm offering you a career. You have talent, vision, and leadership ability. The company needs someone like you. And our other agreement? That ends as agreed. This would be completely separate, based solely on your professional merit. It was tempting. Very tempting. A solid career, an excellent salary, an opportunity for growth in one of the country's largest companies. Everything I had lost when my mom got sick, but on a much larger scale. I need to think about it, I said. Of course. No rush. But there was a rush, yes. Because accepting would mean continuing in Ethan's life indefinitely. Not as a fake wife, but as a coworker. And I wasn't sure I could maintain the necessary emotional distance working with him every day. That night, Mrs. Yolanda passed away. Ethan received the call at 2 in the morning. I heard the phone ring, heard the hurried footsteps in the hallway, and heard his voice change from sleepy to devastated in a matter of seconds. I left my room and found him standing in the middle of the hallway, still holding the phone, with an expression of total shock. Ethan? I whispered. What happened? Mrs. Yolanda. His voice was broken. She's gone. I didn't think, I just acted. I walked up to him and hugged him. Ethan Sterling, the cold and controlled businessman, fell apart in my arms like a child. He cried like I had never seen a man cry before, with a primitive and inconsolable grief. And I held him, whispering words of comfort, being the support he needed in that moment. She raised me, he sobbed against my shoulder. When my parents died, she raised me. She was the only person who loved me unconditionally. I know, I murmured, running my hand through his hair. I know. We stayed there for almost an hour, him crying and me comforting. It was the most real moment we had shared since we met. There was no contract, no charade, no roles to play. It was just human pain and human comfort, in their purest form. When he finally calmed down, he looked at me with red, puffy eyes. Thank you, he said simply. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. You could have stayed in your room. You could have ignored it. It's not part of the contract to comfort me when I'm grieving. Maybe some things are more important than contracts. He watched me for a few seconds, as if he were processing not only his grandmother's death, but also what had happened between us that morning. Claire, You don't need to say anything now, I interrupted. Let's take care of what's necessary. The rest can wait. The next few days were a whirlwind of funeral preparations, lawyers, documents, and family arrangements. Ethan functioned on autopilot, following the social protocols while internally processing his loss. I stayed by his side the whole time, not because I was contractually obligated, but because that's where I wanted to be. The funeral was a grand ceremony, as Mrs. Yolanda would have wanted. Hundreds of people, flowers everywhere, emotional speeches about the legacy of an extraordinary woman. Ethan gave the final speech, and his voice only trembled once, when he said, "My grandmother was a woman of conviction. She believed that people should be judged by their character, not by their social position. I hope to honor that belief for the rest of my life." After the ceremony, the lawyers came. Mrs. Yolanda's will would be read the next day, in a formal meeting with all the heirs and interested parties. "It's protocol," explained Mr. Drummond, the same lawyer who had approached me months ago. She left very specific instructions on how she wanted her assets to be distributed. That night, Ethan was inconsolable again. He was no longer crying, but he was plunged into a deep melancholy that broke my heart. We had dinner in silence, him pushing food around on his plate without actually eating. "She knew," he suddenly said, looking at me. "Knew what? About us. About the contract. She called me before she died and said, 'I hope you don't lose this woman out of pride or stupidity, boy. Some opportunities don't come around twice.'" My heart pounded. "She said that? She said you were the best thing that had happened to me in years. That I would be an idiot if I let you go when the 6 months were up. And what did you say? That it was just a business agreement. That when it ended, we would go our separate ways. And her?" She laughed. "She said that men in the Sterling family have always been terrible at recognizing their own hearts." The silence that followed was charged with unspoken emotions. Finally, Ethan looked up at me. "Claire, I need to tell you something. About the will. About why I really needed a wife." "What do you mean?" "Mrs. Yolanda had a clause in her will. For me to inherit full control of the company, I had to be married and demonstrate emotional stability. If I remained single, control would be divided among other relatives or sold to third parties." The revelation hit me like a punch to the stomach. "So you hired me to secure your inheritance?" "Initially, yes." Ethan. The disappointment in my voice was impossible to hide. "But things changed, Claire. You changed everything. What started as convenience became what?" He hesitated, as if the words were too difficult to pronounce. "It became real." Real. The word echoed between us like a confession. Ethan Sterling, the man who bought solutions for all his problems, was telling me that our feelings had become real. "The will is being read tomorrow," he continued. "And regardless of what happens, I want you to know that these have been the best months of my life in years. You reminded me of who I was before I became just a businessman. Ethan, you don't have to say anything now. But I want you to know that the job offer is still on the table. And that, if you want, I'd like to find out what could be between us when we're no longer pretending." We went up to our rooms that night knowing that everything would change the next day. Mrs. Yolanda's will would define not only the future of the company, but also the future of our relationship. In a few hours, I would know if my presence in Ethan's life had just been a business necessity or if it had become something more. I lay in bed looking at the ceiling, thinking about how my life had changed since I left that small apartment with 3 suitcases. I had entered that house as a desperate woman, willing to sell my dignity for financial security. Now, I was about to find out if I had found something much more valuable than money, a real love, even if it was born from the most artificial circumstances possible. The reading of the will took place in the mansion's library, the same place where Ethan and I had first met. Mr. Drummond presided over the ceremony, surrounded by other lawyers, accountants, and some distant relatives I had never seen before. Ethan was tense, wearing the same black suit he had worn to the funeral, sitting in a leather armchair as if he were a defendant awaiting a sentence. The will of Mrs. Yolanda Sterling, Mr. Drummond began, was drafted with extreme care and revised several times over the past few years. She left very specific instructions on how she wanted her estate to be distributed. He opened the document and began to read the first clauses. Donations to charities, bequests to old employees, some smaller properties for distant relatives. Everything was very formal and expected, until he got to the main part. As for the controlling stake in Sterling Holdings and other companies in the group, Mr. Drummond made a theatrical pause. Mrs. Yolanda leaves 50% of the shares to her grandson, Ethan Sterling, confirming him as president and chief executive of the company. Ethan visibly relaxed in the armchair. 50% was what he expected, what had been promised for years. Enough to maintain control, run the company as he saw fit, and honor the family legacy. However, the lawyer continued, and the word hung in the air like thunder before a storm, the other 50% of the shares are left to Claire Anderson Sterling, her honorary granddaughter, with the condition that she accepts the responsibility of guiding the company with the same wisdom and compassion that she has always demonstrated. The silence in the room was absolute. For a few seconds, no one moved, no one breathed, no one fully processed what had just been said. I had inherited half of a business empire. I, who had been hired as a fake wife, was now the owner of 50% of the shares in Sterling Holdings. Is that possible? I stammered, looking at Mr. Drummond. Perfectly legal, he replied calmly. Mrs. Yolanda had full rights over her shares and could leave them to whomever she wished. She chose you. I looked at Ethan, expecting to see anger, shock, indignation. Instead, I saw something that looked like relief mixed with admiration. As if he finally understood something he hadn't understood before. There is a letter, Mr. Drummond said, handing me a sealed envelope. Mrs. Yolanda asked that it be delivered to Claire personally after the reading of the main clause. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. The handwriting was as delicate as it was elegant, characteristics I had learned to associate with Mrs. Yolanda. My dear Claire, I read out loud, if you are reading this, it means you have finally discovered what I knew since our first tea, you are exactly what the Sterling family needs. Not because you agree with everything, but because you question when necessary. Not because you are submissive, but because you are strong. My grandson hired a wife, but fate sent him a partner. I hope you accept this responsibility not as a burden, but as an opportunity to create something extraordinary. The company needs heart as much as it needs a brain. Ethan has the brain, you have the heart. Together, you can build something that honors the past and transforms the future. With love and trust, Yolanda. When I finished reading, there were tears in my eyes. Mrs. Yolanda had planned everything. From the first meeting, she knew exactly what she was doing. She hadn't been fooled by our charade, she had used our charade to create something real. Ethan, Mr. Drummond said, there is also a letter for you. He opened his own envelope and read it in silence. I could see his expression gradually changing, from shock to understanding, from understanding to something that looked like gratitude. What did she say? I asked. Ethan looked at me, then at the others in the room. That I should stop trying to control everything alone. That I should learn to share responsibilities with someone I trust. And that? He hesitated, that I should stop pretending I didn't fall in love with the woman I hired to solve my problems. The confession echoed in the library like an explosion. The relatives and lawyers present exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly realizing they were witnessing something much more intimate than a simple will reading. Perhaps, Mr. Drummond said diplomatically, we should continue this conversation in private. The legal issues can be discussed later. Everyone left the library, leaving us alone with the weight of the revelations. 50% of the shares. A company to run. An inheritance worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And Ethan looking at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. Claire, he finally said, you don't have to accept. I can buy your shares at market value. You would have enough money to do anything you want for the rest of your life. Is that what you want? For me to sell and disappear? Is that what you want to do? It was a fair question. What did I want? 6 months ago, $500,000 seemed like the solution to all my problems. Now, I had much more than that in my hands. Power, responsibility, the opportunity to truly make a difference. And the chance to find out if what I felt for Ethan was real or just a consequence of an extraordinary situation. I don't know, I replied honestly. This changes everything between us. Why? Because I'm no longer your employee. Now we are partners. Equals. Ethan smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen since Mrs. Yolanda's death. I think that's exactly what she wanted. We spent the rest of the day discussing the practical implications of the inheritance. Documents to sign, lawyers to consult, strategies to define. It was surreal to be sitting at a conference table as the owner of half of one of the country's largest companies, when just a few hours earlier I was still just a hired wife. But the personal issue hung over everything. What would happen to us now that there was no more contract, no more charade, no more financial obligations keeping me there? The answer came that night, during dinner. We were eating in silence, each lost in our own thoughts, when Ethan put down his fork and looked at me directly. "Claire, I need to ask you a question, and I want a completely honest answer." "Okay. Did you stay here all these months just for the money?" The question was simple, but the answer was complex. In the beginning, yes. I was desperate, you offered a way out, I accepted. And now? Now it's different. Different how? I took a deep breath and decided to be as honest as he had asked. Now I care about you. I care about this house, this life, the possibility of building something real together. I don't know if it's love, our situation was so artificial that it's difficult to separate genuine feelings from the need for emotional survival. But I know I don't want to leave. Ethan was silent for a long moment, processing my response. "You know what Mrs. Yolanda wrote in my letter?" "What?" "That true love can grow in the most improbable of circumstances. That sometimes we need to pretend to be something before we discover that we really are that. And that I would be an idiot if I lost you out of pride." "And do you agree with her?" "I agree that I would be an idiot." He got up from the table and walked over to where I was sitting. "Claire, I don't want you to stay here as a partner. I don't want you to stay as an employee. I want you to stay as you." "As me?" "As the woman I fell in love with over the last 6 months. The woman who comforted me when I was grieving. The woman who challenges my decisions and improves my projects. The woman who reminds me of who I was before I became just a businessman." He knelt beside my chair and took my hands. "I know it started as a contract. I know it was artificial, forced, and commercial. But what I feel for you now has nothing to do with contracts or inheritances or family obligations. It's real. It's genuine. And it's the first real thing I've felt in years." I looked at the man kneeling in front of me. Ethan Sterling, who had bought me for $500,000 to solve his family problems. Ethan Sterling, who was now looking at me as if I were the solution to problems he didn't even know he had. Ethan Sterling, who was offering me not another contract, but something infinitely more valuable, a real chance to be happy together. "Ethan," I said, taking my hands from his and touching his face. "I also fell in love with you. Not with the businessman, not with the heir, not with the man in the newspapers. With the man who paints in his grandmother's attic. With the man who cries when he loses someone he loves. With the man who has the humility to admit when he's wrong and the courage to try to be better." He kissed my palm, closing his eyes as if he were absorbing the moment. "So we're together? As partners, as a couple, as whatever this becomes." "We're together," I replied, "but on our terms. Not as a husband and wife of convenience, not as a boss and employee. As equals." "As equals," he repeated, smiling. It was at that moment that I truly understood what Mrs. Yolanda had done. She hadn't just distributed shares, she had redistributed power. Not just in the company, but in our relationship. By giving me 50% of Sterling Holdings, she had ensured that I would never again be financially dependent on Ethan. That our relationship, if it continued, would be based on mutual choice, not necessity. It was the final gift of a wise woman, the freedom to love without desperation. 3 months later, we transformed not only our relationship, but the entire company. We implemented social responsibility policies that were revolutionary for the sector. We created support programs for employees' families who were going through medical difficulties, something inspired by my own experience taking care of my mom. We invested in art and culture projects, honoring Ethan's artistic side that had been stifled for years. "Claire Sterling revolutionizes corporate management," read the headline of the country's most respected business magazine. The article highlighted how our partnership had created a new model of corporate leadership, where technical competence was combined with social sensitivity. But it was on a Friday afternoon, when I found Ethan in Mrs. Yolanda's old studio, which he had started using again, that I realized how much we had really changed. "What do you think?" he asked, showing me a canvas where he was painting a portrait of me. It was beautiful. Not just because of the technique, but because of the way he saw me, strong, confident, luminous. It was as if he was painting not only my physical appearance, but the essence of the woman I had become during those months. "Is that how you see me?" I asked. "That's how you are," he replied, wiping the brush. "The woman who transformed my life by pretending to be my wife and ended up becoming my real partner." We kissed in that studio full of light and possibilities, surrounded by the smell of oil paint and the comforting silence of a house that finally felt like home. It was a different kiss from all the others we had shared during our public performance. It was real, it was ours, it was free of any contractual obligation. "Claire," he said when we separated, "I have a proposal for you." "Another one?" I laughed. I hope it doesn't involve contracts this time. Actually, it does. He stepped back a little and took a small velvet box from the pocket of his paint-stained shirt. A lifelong contract. With no monetary value. Just you and me, building something real together. The ring was simple, elegant, perfect. Not ostentatious like the jewelry I wore at social events, but delicate and meaningful. Ethan. I know we started with a farce, he said, kneeling in the middle of the studio. I know our story isn't conventional. But I want it to be our real story. Not a performance to convince the family, not a business agreement to solve problems. Just the two of us, choosing to be together every day. I looked at the man kneeling in front of me, surrounded by paints and brushes, offering not money or security, but something infinitely more valuable, a real partnership based on love, respect, and mutual choice. Yes, I said, extending my hand. But with one condition. What is it? That you never again treat me like a decorative object.
If this story kept you hooked until now, just imagine the next ones. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any. Give this one a like, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from right now.
That you always remember you didn't buy me, you found me. He slid the ring onto my finger and smiled with a happiness that lit up the whole studio. Deal, partner. A year later, our real wedding ceremony took place in the mansion's garden, where everything had begun. Small, intimate, just for the people who really mattered. No press, no ostentation, no performance. Just a man and a woman who had discovered that true love can grow in the most improbable of circumstances. During my speech, I looked at the guests and said, people always ask how a love story can begin with a business contract. The answer is simple, because sometimes we need to pretend to be something before we discover that we really are that. Ethan hired me to be his wife. I ended up becoming his partner. He bought me for $500,000. I ended up buying his heart for something that has no price, authenticity. Ethan laughed, that genuine laugh I had learned to love, and whispered, actually, you were the one who ended up in charge. From day one. Today, 5 years later, I lead meetings at the table where Ethan once explained the terms of our fake contract. The company has grown 300% under our joint leadership, but more importantly, we have created a legacy that Mrs. Yolanda would be proud of. A company that generates profit without forgetting humanity, that grows without losing its soul. Sometimes, when I'm in my office, the same one that was once temporary, I remember the desperate woman who agreed to pretend to be a stranger's wife for $500,000. She thought she was selling her dignity for security. In reality, she was buying a new life. Because the truth about love is this, it doesn't care how it starts. It only cares about where it ends. And we ended up exactly where we were supposed to be, together, as equals, building something extraordinary from the ruins of two lives that needed to be rebuilt. Ethan bought me for $500,000 thinking he was solving a family problem. I accepted thinking I was solving a financial problem. Neither of us imagined that we were, in fact, solving the most important problem of all, how to find someone who loves us not for what we pretend to be, but for who we really are. In the end, it wasn't me or him who ended up in charge. It was love. And that, we discovered, is exactly how it should be.